Hello everyone, in this video we're going to talk about the basic structure of the eye. We're going to go through all of the parts and what they do, and then at the end I'm going to show you a very quick way of being able to draw this entire diagram out from scratch, just putting in the key structures that you need to learn about at key stage 3 and 4. Okay, so we've got our diagram of the eye here, right in the middle with a few labels, so we're going to go round, we're going to fill in these bit by bit and just say what the parts do. On another video we're going to talk about how the eye accommodates, so how the eye is able to see near and far objects, but this one is purely just to identify the points, the parts rather, and what they ultimately do. So let's start with this blue bit around the outside, this label just here. Now this blue label here is meant to represent the white part of the eye. So when you look at somebody's eye, just very basically you see the whites around the outside. That's the white part of the eye, and that is called the sclera. S-C-L-E-R-A, the sclera is the white outer covering of the eye. That's what that part is. Okay, let's start from the front and work our way backwards. So we've got this front white part of the eye, so we're looking on the left hand side, and this white part here is what we call the cornea. The cornea is actually the most commonly transplanted part of the human body, interestingly. But the job of the cornea is to refract, or just simply bend. That's what refract means, to bend the light rays towards the lens. So we can put the lens in place. The lens is this big sort of blue, light blue oval thing in the eye. So we've got the cornea that will refract light towards the lens. And the job of the lens is ultimately to refract light. So we'll just draw it in blue. It's basically to refract light backwards towards the back of the eye, towards the retina, which we'll come to shortly. So the cornea refracts light to the lens refracts light to the retina. Now we've got this pupil in the middle of the eye here. So when you look at somebody's eye, the pupil is the big black spot in the middle. It's actually an empty hole. The job of the pupil is to allow light to enter the eye. So it actually widens and constricts to control the amount of light entering. But it's not the pupil that actually dictates that controls that, whether it's open or how open it is. It's this part here that I'm labelling the iris. The iris is the coloured part of the eye. So when you look at somebody and you see they've got brown eyes, blue eyes, green eyes. It's this part here, the iris. The iris is a coloured ring of muscle. And because it's muscle, it contracts and relaxes. And by contracting and relaxing, it controls the size of the pupil, which ultimately determines how much light is let into the eye. And that's kind of reflex mechanism to prevent damage. So if, for example, there's a lot of light coming into the iris will constrict to make sure that the pupil is small, so the right amount comes in, so not too much light will enter the eye. If it's quite dark and there's not a lot of light, the iris will allow the pupil to widen to let as much light in as possible. So that's the iris and the pupil. Pupil lets light in, it's the iris which ultimately controls how much light is let in by contracting and relaxing. Now let's pick up with the lens. The lens is held in place by two structures. This one at the bottom here, you can see these sort of, if I just draw a black line to show, these sort of very fine strands. These are known as the suspensory ligaments. Suspensory ligaments. So they're not muscle, they don't contract and relax, they simply just go very tight or very loose or slack. So we've got suspensory ligaments attached to the lens, and those ligaments, you can see, are attached to this. If I just highlight it in red at the bottom here, this part here that I'm just roughly shading in, this red part here, and that is muscle, and I'll label it the equivalent on the top. That is known as ciliary muscle. So you have a ciliary muscle which attaches to the lens via these suspensory ligaments. And if we follow that ciliary muscle round, we can see we actually come to this label here. Now this is just given a special name of choroid. But ultimately the job of the suspensory ligaments is to go loose or to tighten to control the shape of the lens. And the ciliary muscle contracts and relaxes again to ultimately control the shape of the lens. And it's all to do with whether we're looking at a distant or a close object. So depending on which we're looking at, the ciliary muscle will contract and relax, and the suspensory ligaments will tighten or go loose to change the shape of that lens. So let's come to the final few labels. This yellow part, if I will change the colour as well, this yellow part of the back of the eye here is the retina. So the back of the eye is the retina. Now the retina is where we have all our photosensitive sort of cells. Photosensitive means light sensitive. So it's got our rods and cones, the ones that pick up black and colour. So it allows us to detect what we're seeing, essentially. So the retina is where we have all our photosensitive cells. And there's a point on that retina that's directly behind, almost in a straight line, directly behind the pupil. And it's where most of those photosensitive cells are. It's about 90% of those photosensitive cells are in this one region right at the back of the eye on the retina. And that region is called the fovea. F-O-V-E-A. It's also sometimes referred to as the macula densa. So the fovea is also called the macula densa. And that's where most of the photosensitive cells are that will detect the light. Once we've detected the light, once the rods and cones have picked up that stimulus, we then need to communicate that to the brain. And we do so via this here. We've got the optic nerve. So the optic nerve carries information from the retina to the visual cortex of the brain, the part of the brain that's going to recognise and understand and interpret that information. So this big bit at the back here, all of this is our optic nerve. You'll notice at the top of the optic nerve there's this sort of a light pink oval. That's the point, the beginning of the optic nerve, and there's no photosensitive cells there. And that is what we often refer to as our blind spot. And then finally, that only needs one label, and this quite simply is just a blood vessel. We've just got a blood vessel running alongside the optic nerve. Now that's the basic structure of the eye. You're never going to be asked in school to draw the whole thing from scratch. But if you think of what the jobs are, you can put in some basic structures and build it up. So I'm just going to show you how you can do that. So if we just shrink this so we can still see it, and just put that into the corner. So only very, very quickly, you can just draw a rough sketch of the eye. Just draw the basic shape. And then we can just put in a few bits and bobs to help us just build the picture up. Again, you're not going to be asked to draw this, but it just helps for revision purposes. So you can put in the front bit, the cornea here. Next we'll put in the lens, that big light blue coloured thing. We know we've got suspensory ligaments coming off the lens to hold it in place. It's not just free floating. And those ligaments are attached to muscle. So we'll put the muscle in there. We know we've got the retina at the back of the eye here. And on the retina you've got the fovea right behind the lens. And all that information has to pass to the brain, so you can put in the optic nerve here. Now, again, that's a very quick sketch of the eye. But what we've been able to do is just kind of build up very quickly some of the key parts of the eye, especially when we think about how the eye focuses. Because the important things really that we're going to look at are the cornea, the lens, fovea, and ultimately how the suspensory ligaments and ciliary muscles are able to change the shape of the lens to focus the light to the fovea. Just one thing to mention also, I haven't spoke about it on the main diagram or on this one, but you'll notice on the main picture at the top, there's this whole region here coloured in red. Now you don't often get asked about that, but that is actually an area filled with fluid. That fluid is known as vitreous humor. It's a term you don't often get asked about, but the purpose of the vitreous humor, or that fluid, is to maintain the shape of the eye. So it's kind of for structural support, but it helps maintain that rounded shape of the eye. But that's what that red fluid is. Now you may on the internet and in books see that there actually is another fluid in this region between the cornea and the lens, and that's called aqueous humor. Does the same job, helps to maintain and support the shape of the eye. But I just wanted to explain that just for completeness sake. So all that red at the top on the diagram is the vitreous humor that maintains the shape. But like I said, you don't often get asked about that particular part. So here, if we just go back, is our basic structure of the eye. Okay, I hope that helps.